Welcome back to The Deep Dive. I'm your host, and today we are doing something a little bit different.
Glad to be here for this one. I'm your resident historian for the day, and yeah, this is definitely a shift from our usual stack of modern articles or tech books.
Right. Usually we're breaking down, contemporary psychology or economics, but today we are looking at a single historical source. Though calling it just a document feels like a massive understatement.
Yeah.
We are essentially looking at a weapon.
That is exactly what it was, a weapon made of paper and ink.
We're traveling back to Philadelphia. It is January 1776. The air is freezing. The mood in the streets is, let's call it, complicated.
Very complicated.
And into this mess drops a pamphlet called Common Sense. It's published anonymously. It's written by a guy who has practically been in the country for 5 minutes, and yet it changes absolutely everything.
It really does. And I think before we even get into the text itself, you have to understand the specific moment in time. The author actually calls it the seed time.
The seed time. I like that image. It implies that whatever is planted right now is going to grow into the future, for better or worse.
Right. It's crucial context for anyone listening to really grasp. The colonies are in this weird limbo. The fighting has actually started. Lexington and Concord happened almost a year ago.
Right. People are literally dying.
Exactly. But the mindset hasn't caught up to the reality of the violence. People are shooting at British soldiers in the afternoon, but they are still toasting the king at dinner.
Which is just such a wild cognitive dissonance. I mean, thinking, I'm going to shoot your troops, but God save the king.
It sounds crazy to us now, but the prevailing thought was that the king was innocent. He was being misled by a corrupt ministry or a bad parliament. If the colonists could just get the king's attention, he would fix it. They wanted reconciliation. They desperately wanted to go back to the way things were in 1763.
And then Thomas Paine walks in and says, absolutely not.
He doesn't just say no. He completely demolishes the entire psychological framework that allowed the colonists to feel loyal to Britain in the first place. He argues that the problem isn't a specific tax, or even a specific law.
It's deeper than that.
Way deeper. The problem is the structure itself. You have to remember, he's telling an entire colony to break up with the most powerful empire on earth, and he's doing it using logic, humor, and what he repeatedly calls plain truth.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We aren't just going to skim the famous quotes you might remember from high school. We are going to deconstruct this argument the exact same way he deconstructed the British Empire.
Step by step.
Right. We're going to look at his 4 main sections. So that's the philosophy of government, the attack on the monarchy, the specific argument for American independence, and then the logistical roadmap for how to actually win.
And we really can't forget the appendix.
Oh, the appendix is spicy. Yeah. We will definitely get there.
Yeah.
But let's start where he starts, the philosophical foundation. Because before he talks about America or Britain, he really takes a step back and talks about the human condition.
Right. He starts with a distinction that I think most of us today probably gloss over entirely. We use the words society and government almost interchangeably.
Yeah, like society dictates this or the government dictates that.
Exactly. But for Paine, these are opposites.
Opposites.
Diametric opposites. And understanding this is the absolute key to the whole pamphlet. If you don't get this distinction, you really don't get the rest of his argument.
Okay, so let's unpack this for the listener. What is society in his view?
Society is the patron. It's produced by our wants. You and I, we have needs I can't fulfill alone. I can't grow food, build a house, and make clothes all at the exact same time.
Nobody can.
Right. So I help you, you help me. We trade, we congregate. Society promotes our happiness. It unites our affections. It's the natural state of humans working together.
So it's the good stuff. It's the warm and fuzzy part of humanity. Neighbors helping neighbors, communities forming just because it's better than being out there alone.
Yes. But then you have government, and government is the punisher.
The punisher. That sounds intense.
It is. It is produced by our wickedness. Paine argues that if everyone acted with a perfectly clear conscience, if everyone treated each other fairly in that society phase we just talked about, we wouldn't need government at all.
But we don't.
We don't. We have vices. We steal, we cheat, we hurt each other. So we need a restraining force.
He has this really great line here. He says, government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil.
And in its worst state, an intolerable one. It's such a powerful distinction. He uses this analogy of dress, meaning clothing. He says government is the badge of lost innocence.
I love that. It's very biblical. Like, if Adam and Eve hadn't eaten the apple, they wouldn't even need clothes.
Precisely. He even says the palaces kings are built on the ruins of the bowers of paradise. Government isn't this glorious divine institution gifted from God to perfectly order our lives.
It's a bandage.
It's a bandage. It's a glaring sign that we are flawed.
So, if government is just a necessary evil utility to keep us from killing each other, then his logic is that it shouldn't be complicated.
That's his principle of simplicity. He argues that the simpler a thing is, the less liable it is to be disordered. And more importantly, the easier it is to repair if it breaks.
Which totally makes sense. If your toaster is a simple mechanical device, you can probably fix it. If it has a tiny computer inside it, good luck.
Great modern equivalent.
Yeah.
And to prove how simple government should be and where it actually comes from organically, he takes us on a little mental vacation, the parable of the settlers.
I want to walk through this because it's such a brilliantly clear way to strip away all the mystery of politics. He asks us to imagine a small group of people stranded in a sequestered part of the earth.
Right. So phase 1 is natural liberty. They are completely alone in the wilderness. What's the first thing they do?
They form a society.
Exactly. Not because a king sitting on a throne across the ocean told them to, but because they will literally starve if they don't. One man can't fell a tree and move it by himself. They need reciprocal blessings.
Okay, so they survive. They build their little huts. They are eating. That's the society phase working perfectly. Everyone is pitching in.
But then comes phase 2. They get comfortable, they start relaxing in their duty and attachment, as he puts it. Maybe someone steals a shovel. Maybe someone doesn't do their fair share of the harvest work.
Laxity. The honeymoon period is officially over.
Right. Laxity creates a need for regulation. So they decide to gather under a convenient tree.
The Tree of Liberty.
Literally, this tree is their very first state house. And in this first parliament, every single man has a seat by natural right. It's pure democracy. They make some rules. But the only penalty they actually have is public disesteem.
Basically just saying, if you break the rules, we're all going to think you're a jerk.
Which works in a tiny village. If you're the outcast in a village of 20 people, that hurts. But then the colony grows. This is phase 3. The people live too far apart to all walk to the tree every single time there's an issue. It becomes highly inconvenient.
So they have to invent a new system. They physically cannot fit everyone under the tree anymore.
Representation. They agree purely out of convenience to select a few people to go to the tree for them. And Paine emphasizes a massive point here. The elected officials need to mix frequently with the electors.
Meaning they can't form a separate elite class.
Exactly. They have to return to the general population often so that their interests stay perfectly aligned with the people they represent.
He says, on this, and not on the unmeaning name of king, depends the strength of government and the happiness of the governed.
He's completely stripping the magic away. He's telling you that government isn't about divine right or royal bloodlines or holy oil. It's about convenience and security. It's just a tool.
And if the tool stops working, or if the tool becomes too expensive and dangerous, like, say, a king, you throw it out and get a new one.
It's painfully logical. But you have to realize, at the time, this was pure heresy. Because the British system wasn't simple at all. It was incredibly complex.
Which leads us directly into his attack on the absolute pride of the British Empire, the English Constitution. Now, to modern ears, attacking a constitution sounds a bit odd, but at the time, this was considered the most perfect system of government in history. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Even the colonists, up until this very moment, worshipped the English Constitution. They thought it was this brilliant, complex machine of checks and balances.
And Paine looks at this perfect machine and basically says, actually, it's garbage.
He does not hold back.
He calls it a base remain of two ancient tyrannies. He says, look at the actual ingredients. You have the remains of monarchical tyranny, which is the king. You have the remains of aristocratic tyranny, which are the peers, or the House of Lords.
Right.
And then you have this tiny little bit of new Republican material, which is the House of Commons.
But the prevailing argument was that these three things checked each other. The Commons checks the king checks the Commons. It's a beautiful loop of accountability. That sounds really good on paper.
And Paine exposes that as a logical farce.
He really does. He says, think about it for a second. To say the Commons checks the king implies that the king cannot be trusted. It acknowledges that there is a thirst for absolute power inherent in the monarchy that needs to be contained.
Right, because if the king was naturally perfect and good, you wouldn't need to check him at all.
But then the Constitution turns around and gives the king the power to check the Commons. which implies that the king is somehow wiser than the people who are just elected to check him.
It's a totally circular argument.
It's absurd. Paine uses this great metaphor of a door. He says the English system is like shutting the door against absolute monarchy, but then being foolish enough to give the king the key.
And that key is the veto power. It's the corruption, the ability to hand out places and pensions to buy loyalty. Paine argues that despite the fancy appearance of liberty, the king is still the overbearing part. The whole system is completely rigged to favor the crown.
But he doesn't stop at just the legal structure. He goes for the throat. He attacks the very concept of monarchy itself.
This is the part that feels the most radical to me. He's not just saying George III is a bad apple. He's saying the entire orchard is rotten.
Correct. He goes after hereditary succession, and he does it using two main arguments that he knows will deeply resonate with his specific audience: religion and nature.
Let's start with religion. Paine wasn't exactly a devout Orthodox Christian later in life. He was a deist. But here, he sounds like an evangelical preacher.
He knows his audience perfectly. The colonists are deeply religious, mostly Protestant, so he goes straight to the Old Testament. He retells the story of Gideon and the prophet Samuel.
The thunder and rain story. I actually hadn't heard this interpretation before reading Paine for this deep dive.
It's incredibly powerful. So he recounts how the Jewish people went to the prophet Samuel and said, "We want a king so we can be like all the other heathen nations."
And Samuel is horrified.
He is. He tells them, God is your king. He warns them exactly what a human king will do. He will take your sons for his armies. He will take your daughters for his kitchens. He will aggressively tax your fields.
Which is exactly what the British were doing to the colonies. It must have felt like he was reading from the Daily News.
Exactly. But the people insist. They want a king anyway. So Samuel prays, and God effectively says, "They haven't rejected you, Samuel. They have rejected me." And to show his sheer displeasure, God sends thunder and rain during the wheat harvest.
Which was a terrifying sign because it could destroy their entire food supply for the winter.
So Paine's argument here is absolute. The Almighty expressly disapproves of government by kings. It is a sin.
He even calls it the popery of government.
Which is a massive trigger word for Protestants at the time. He's associating monarchy with the perceived corruption of the Catholic Church. He's saying, if you are a good, honest Christian, you simply cannot support a king.
And then he hits them with a biological argument. The ass for a lion.
This is one of the funniest and most biting lines in the whole text.
It really is. He says, if hereditary right were a natural or divine thing, nature wouldn't make it look so completely ridiculous. But nature frequently gives mankind an ass for a lion.
Meaning, you might have a king who is a lion, brave, smart, highly capable, but his son might be a total donkey.
And yet that donkey gets to rule millions of people just because of who his dad was. Paine asks this really simple question. How can that possibly be right? Wisdom isn't hereditary. Virtue isn't hereditary, so why on earth should power be?
He argues it just forcefully opens the door to the foolish, the wicked, and the improper.
He really strips away the majesty of it all. And speaking of stripping away majesty, he does an absolute number on William the Conqueror.
Oh, poor William. The entire British monarchy traced its legitimacy back to 1066. Paine looks at that grand origin story and just laughs. He calls William a French bastard landing with an armed banditti.
Armed banditti. He's literally calling the founder of the monarchy a gang leader.
He says William established himself against the consent of the natives. There was absolutely no divinity there. It was just a very paltry, rascally original.
A paltry, rascally original. I just love the language. It's so wildly disrespectful.
But it had to be. He had to forcefully break the spell. He's telling the reader directly, you are worshiping a thug. And then he points out the isolation of kings. He says, how can a king possibly know what the people need?
Because the king is shut away from the world.
Exactly. Living in a bubble of luxury and sycophants. Paine says his mind is poisoned by importance.
So the one person with the least experience of real life is the one making the most important decisions for everyone. It's structurally impossible for a king to be a good governor.
So Paine has dismantled the philosophy of government, showing it's just a tool. He has dismantled the legitimacy of the king, showing it's a sin and a scam. Now, in section 3, he pivots to the now.
Right.
This is where he stops being a philosopher and really starts being a revolutionary leader.
Thoughts on the present state of American affairs. This is a direct call to action.
And he starts by tackling the biggest emotional anchor the Loyalists had, the mother country myth.
We actually still hear this today. Britain is the mother country. It sounds so nurturing, like a warm family.
Paine calls it a Jesuitical trick. He says it's a phrase perfectly designed to manipulate you. He argues that Europe, not England, is the actual parent of America.
Because America is already a nation of immigrants.
Right. He calls America the asylum for the persecuted lovers of civil and religious liberty from every part of Europe. He points out that the first settlers didn't leave England because they loved it. They fled from the cruelty of the monster.
And he brings the data to back it up. He points to Pennsylvania and says, look around you. Not even 1/3 of the people here are of English descent.
He uses a brilliant logic trap here. He says, if English descent automatically makes you a subject of England, well then by that exact same logic, half of England should be governed by France, because the first English kings were French.
Touché. It's a great reductio ad absurdum. If you follow their logic all the way, the whole empire falls apart.
But the emotional argument is really just the warm-up. He hits the practical economic argument incredibly hard. There was a huge, very real fear that without Britain, America would just go broke.
Who would buy the tobacco? Who would buy the timber?
Paine has a very simple answer for that. Our corn will fetch its price in any market in Europe.
Supply and demand.
People in France need to eat. People in Spain need to eat. As long as eating is the custom of Europe, America will always have customers.
In fact, he argues that the connection to Britain is actually bad for business.
This is a crucial point for the listener to grasp. Being part of the British Empire meant that whenever Britain went to war, which, let's be honest, was all the time America automatically got dragged into it, American merchant ships became instant targets for the French or Spanish navies.
So our trade gets cut off. Not because of anything we did wrong, but because Britain is picking a fight with someone else over in Europe.
Paine says our true interest is commerce, and commerce works best with peace. If America separates, she can be completely neutral. She can trade freely with everyone. Britain's enemies do not have to be America's enemies.
So independence isn't just about lofty ideas of freedom. It's about prosperity and safety. It's literally a peace strategy.
In his view, yes. He says neutrality is a safer convoy than a British man of war.
But then the tone drastically shifts. He moves from economics to pure, raw emotion. He talks about crossing the Rubicon.
April 19th, 1775. Lexington and Concord. The shot heard round the world. Paine argues that before that specific date, maybe you could talk about reconciliation. But the moment the first bullet was fired, the period of debate is permanently closed. Arms must decide the contest.
He gets really fiery here. He invokes the Pharaoh image.
He calls George III the hardened, sullen-tempered Pharaoh of England. He's explicitly comparing the Americans to the Israelites enslaved in Egypt. It's that biblical framing again, pushing all the right buttons.
And he directly challenges the reader. This is one of the most powerful passages in the document. He asks, hath your house been burnt? Hath your property been destroyed? Have you lost a parent or a child by their hands?
He's aggressively putting the reader on the spot. He says if you haven't suffered these things, you aren't a fair judge of those who have. But if you have suffered them, and you can still shake hands with the murderers, then you are unworthy the name of husband, father, friend, or lover.
You have the heart of a coward. That's a direct quote.
It's deep shaming. He's telling the fence-sitters that their political moderation isn't a virtue anymore. It's a moral failing. It's a betrayal of their own families.
And finally, in this section, he brings in the natural order. I really love the planet analogy.
Oh, it's brilliant. In no instance hath nature made the satellite larger than its primary planet.
It's such a geeky, scientific burn for the 18th century.
It makes a total visual sense. England is a tiny island. America is a massive continent. It is physically absurd for an island to govern a continent. It reverses the entire order of nature.
And the distance argument supports this perfectly. It took 5 or 6 months just to get a letter to London and back.
Imagine trying to run a government with a 6-month lag. You send a frantic petition. Hey, we have a major problem with the Indians on the frontier. By the time the answer comes back saying, okay, send troops, the war is already over, or the problem has totally changed.
Paine says this proves God's intent. The sheer distance is physical evidence that the Almighty never intended for one to rule the other. If they cannot conquer us, which he says they can't, and they cannot govern us, which the distance proves they can't, then the connection is entirely unnatural.
So we've covered the philosophy, the history, and the moral outrage. But there's always that one guy in the back of the room who raises his hand and says, okay, sure, independence sounds great, but we are going to lose. Britain has the biggest navy in the world. We have rowboats.
Right. Section 4 of the Presidentability of America. This is where Paine basically pulls out the spreadsheets.
This is the deep dive into data part of the pamphlet.
It really is. Paine was totally obsessed with the idea of now or never. He argues that the colonies are in a perfect seed time.
He argues that the colonies are in a unique demographic sweet spot. They're young enough to be united, but old enough to have real strength. He points out that if they wait 50 years, they will be richer, sure, but they'll be way more divided. Their interests will diverge. The South will hate the North. The big cities will hate the rural areas.
That sounds vaguely familiar.
Right. He accurately predicts that immense wealth leads to a decay of unity. Second, he points to experience. They just finished fighting the French and Indian War. They have thousands of veterans who actually know how to march, shoot, and camp.
Martial ability.
Exactly. In 50 years, those specific guys will be dead. The institutional knowledge of war will be lost. So militarily, they are at an absolute peak right now.
And then he drops the naval analysis. I was genuinely surprised by how detailed this was. He literally breaks down the cost of building a ship in pounds and shillings.
He did the math. He cites that a ship of 100 guns costs exactly 35,553 tarancher. He calculates that the entire British Navy, every single ship they own, is worth about 3.5 million pounds.
Which sounds like a massive amount of money.
It is. But then he looks at Britain's actual finances. Britain is 140 million in debt. They are paying interest on that debt that is almost equal to the value of their whole navy. They're broke.
And America.
America has zero national debt. Paine argues that for just a 20th part of the English national debt, America could build a navy to completely match them.
Plus, we already have the raw materials.
This is the key strategic advantage. Britain is an island. They have to import everything to build those ships. They buy timber from the Baltic, tar from Sweden. America, we are swimming in resources. We have the tar, the timber, the iron, the cordage. It's all right here in our backyards.
And he makes a very smart strategic point about how to actually use that navy. He says we don't need to match them ship for ship on a global scale.
Right. Britain has a massive empire to run. They have ships in India, ships in Africa, ships guarding the Channel against France. They can't just send everything to America. Paine estimates they can only spare maybe a fraction of their fleet.
So if we build a coastal navy, just enough to aggressively protect our own harbors, we actually have a local advantage, maybe a 20-to-1 advantage against whatever small squadron they manage to send over.
It's a brilliant reframing. He takes a terrifying prospect war with the invincible Royal Navy and turns it into a solvable math problem. He gives the reader hard confidence that this is actually doable.
He also warns about what happens if they don't do it. The Massanello warning.
This is the dark side of the now or never argument. Tommaso Agnello, or Massanello, was a fisherman in Naples who led a frantic, chaotic revolt and became a dictator for a short time.
The void invites tyranny.
Paine deeply warns that if the colonies leave the seat of government vacant, if they don't form a constitution and a legitimate government now while they are highly united, some adventurer is going to come along. Some charismatic military leader will gather a following and seize power.
He's basically predicting a Napoleon figure. Or a Caesar.
He says, "Ye that oppose independence now, ye know not what you do, ye are opening a door to eternal tyranny. If you want true law and order, you have to formally build the republic now. Delay is dangerously inviting a dictator."
So the pamphlet comes out. It's an overnight smash hit. But Paine wasn't quite done. He actually added an appendix to the later editions to address some immediate real-time feedback.
The appendix is fascinating because it shows Paine reacting to the news cycle. It primarily addresses two things: the King's speech and the Quakers.
Talk about crazy serendipity. The King's speech was published in Philadelphia on the exact same day Common Sense hit the streets.
You couldn't script it any better. The King gave a speech to Parliament basically saying, "I am sending troops, and we are going to violently crush this rebellion with force."
So much for the olive branch petition.
Paine completely seizes on this. He calls the speech a piece of finished villainy. He says it's a formal and pompous method of offering up human sacrifices.
He argues that the speech instantly proves his point. There is absolutely no hope for reconciliation. The king isn't a confused, loving father. He's a savage actively hunting for prey.
It validated everything Paine had just written. It showed all the fence-sitters. See, I told you, he literally wants to kill you.
And then the Quakers. Now, Philadelphia was a Quaker city. These were Paine's actual neighbors. But he goes after them so hard.
It was a very delicate situation. The Quakers were devout pacifists. They had recently published a formal testimony calling for Americans to submit to the king and stop fighting because godly people don't plot to overturn governments.
Paine was not having it.
He tries to start off respectful of their religion, but he absolutely savages their politics. He calls them out for blatant hypocrisy. He says, "Look, If your theology is that God sets up and takes down kings, then why are you interfering? If it's God's work, let God do it. By writing a pamphlet actively supporting the king, you are meddling in politics, which you just said you wouldn't do.
It's the ultimate stay-in-your-lane argument.
And he uses the arms argument against them. He says, you preach against Americans bearing arms to defend themselves, but I don't see you preaching to the king's admirals and soldiers who are currently burning our towns.
That's the real stinging part. He says, if bearing arms is sinful, the first person to go to war is the most sinful. The king started this. The Americans are just defending their homes. So if the Quakers were truly honest, they'd be yelling at George III, not the colonists.
He forcefully accuses them of mistaking party for conscience. He says they are acting like political partisans, not religious leaders. It was a brutal takedown, but politically it was totally necessary to neutralize their influence in Philadelphia.
Okay, so we have been through the whole text. We've seen the philosophical dismantling of the Tree of Liberty. We've seen the savage takedown of the royal brute. We've seen the economic case, the military strategy, and the defense against the local critics.
It is a masterclass in persuasive writing.
But when you zoom out from all the attacks, what is the ultimate goal? It wasn't just to break something down, it was to build something new.
Paine explicitly talks about a continental charter. He actually sketches out a rough plan for a new government. He suggests a broad Congress, a president chosen by lot, which is an interesting idea we obviously didn't end up using, and a manifesto fiercely securing freedom and property.
But the core idea, the actual soul of the American experiment, comes in one very specific moment. He asks the rhetorical question that everyone in the colonies was secretly thinking, where is the King of America?
Because people were terrified of a headless state, they deeply needed a figurehead to feel safe.
And Paine answers, I'll tell you, friend, he reigns above.
Meaning God. But then he brings it right down to earth. He says, in America, the law is king.
That is the revolution right there in 5 words.
In absolute governments, the king is law. In free countries, the law ought to be king. He even suggests a ceremony, and this is so beautifully theatrical, where they take the crown, the symbol of absolute power, and smash it. Scatter it among the people whose right it is.
Power formally belongs to the people, not the person. It's not a transfer of power from George to Washington. It's a permanent transfer of power from a man to a system, to the law.
That is the common sense that literally changed the world.
Before we go, I want to leave you, the listener, with one thought that really stuck with me. It goes back to that seed time idea we talked about at the start.
The limited window of opportunity.
Paine forcefully argued that youth is the seed time of good habits. He believed that because America was young, small, and not yet overly rich or complex, it was the only time they could possibly pull this radical shift off.
He actually compares it to the city of London. He says the city of London submits to insults with the patience of a coward. Why? Because they are too rich. They have way too much to lose.
Trade and population, he argues, can easily lead to a decay of patriotism. When you become too heavily focused on commerce and comfort, you become too timid to defend your rights. You become a slave to fear.
It's a very provocative theory that civilization has a strict sell-by date for structural change. That once you get too big, too wealthy, too painfully complicated, you just become paralyzed.
So, here's the question for you today. We are 250 years past that original seed time. We are now the complex, wealthy, massive nation Paine described as the old world.
We are the city of London now.
Have we become the complicated state Paine warned against? Are we too afraid of losing our comfort to make bold changes? Or is that revolutionary seed still there?
Paine said, we have it in our power to begin the world over again. The ultimate question is, does that power expire?
Definitely something to mull over. That was our deep dive into common sense. Thanks for listening, and keep thinking.